Hi, this is Miss DeVito. Today I'm going to show you how to take layers of flaky French pastry and perfect vanilla pastry cream and put them together to prepare a decadent cream pastry called a Napoleon, or as the French call it, a mille feuilles, which means 1,000 leaves. For this recipe, you need 3/4 of a teaspoon of unflavored gelatin, 1½ teaspoons of cold water, 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, a pinch of salt, 3 egg yolks, 1 cup of whole milk, 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. You will also need a medium mixing bowl that can withstand heat, a medium saucepan, and a whisk. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bloom my gelatin. I'm going to pour it over the top of the cold water and I'm going to let it sit. And this is going to allow it to bloom or rehydrate so that when we apply it to our cold pastry cream, it will melt nicely. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take half the amount of the sugar and I'm going to combine it with the milk and also adding a pinch of salt to this. And I'm going to bring it to the stove and I'm going to heat it until it starts to simmer. Making sure I don't go too far away from it so it doesn't boil over. So while I am heating my milk, I'm going to prepare the rest of my ingredients. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the egg yolks and the egg whites. I do not need the egg whites for this recipe, so I put them into a container on the side and I use them for either a future baking recipe or I can make them in the morning for my breakfast scrambled egg whites. As you notice, I crack the shells, I open them in half, and then I take the egg yolk and slide it from one egg shell to the other, and that allows the whites to drip down into my container. I'm going to add my 3 egg yolks to my medium mixing bowl that is heat proof, and the other half of the sugar that I have remaining and my cornstarch, and I'm going to combine these together. So now my eggs are ready to be introduced to the hot liquid. My milk has started to bubble on the sides. I don't want it to boil, I'm just looking for a simmer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a small amount of the hot milk and I'm going to slowly incorporate it into our egg. What I'm doing here is tempering the egg. I am actually introducing them to the hot liquid slowly so that when I bring them back onto the stove, they are not in shock by the heat that is happening in the pot. They are already slightly warmed up so they won't scramble. They will slowly cook at this point. So now I'm going to continuously stir my mixture until it starts to thicken. At this point, I cannot stop whisking because it will burn and scramble. As you notice, it will start to bubble. When it starts to bubble for about 15 to 20 seconds, you're going to take it off the stove because it has reached its maximum thickness. So now I'm going to add my vanilla extract, and then I'm also going to add that bloomed gelatin at this point. And I'm going to stir it in really well into the recipe. After I have combined it and the gelatin has melted, I'm going to pour it into a heat-proof pan so that it can cool. And I like to do this the day before I'm going to make my Napoleons, so it has time to cool and that the gelatin can be at its maximum thickness. All right. There are 3 things that are helping to thicken this pastry cream, this custard, and they are the gelatin, the cornstarch, and also the egg yolk. So before I put it in the refrigerator to cool, I'm actually going to put some plastic wrap on top of it. Now I want the plastic wrap to touch the pastry cream, and this is called to put a skin on it, because if I do not allow the plastic wrap to touch the custard, an actual skin will form on top of it, almost like leathery, and you're going to lose part of your product. So this is called put a skin on it. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator overnight, and then I am ready to start to prepare my puff pastry layers. So I'm using half a box of Pepperidge Farm pre-made frozen puff pastry sheets that I let sit in my refrigerator overnight after I made my pastry cream so that they are easily to work with the next day. If you need to flour your surface, you can do that, but it's not a very sticky dough. I'm going to roll this out a little bit bigger because I want to have uniform pieces and I want to get about 12 Napoleons. So the original size of this puff pastry sheet is 10.5 by 15, and I just want to roll it out a little bit thinner and bigger. I'm going to roll it out to a 12 by 18 rectangle. I'm going to use my ruler to make sure that I get squares for my desserts. If you want to make them more rectangular, you can do that as well. But I find that about a 3 by 3 or 2 by 3 inch shape is a good size for these per person. So after I measure out all of my squares, I'm going to place them on a parchment lined baking sheet. And I'm just going to leave a small space in between each one because these will rise up, spreading out. So after I've cut them all, I'm actually going to sprinkle them with a little bit of granulated sugar, which will help them brown and add a little bit more sweetness to the recipe. I'm going to put one sheet of parchment paper on top of them and then another baking pan right on top of them before I put them into the oven. The reason for the second baking pan is because while I do want them to rise, I don't want them to rise too much. I want them to be really I bake them in a 400 degree preheated oven for 12 to 15 minutes until they're nice and golden brown. And you see the other pan makes them nice and thin, but very crispy. Whipped cream. So now I'm going to prepare a little bit of pastry cream for a little bit of added flavor. I need 1 cup of heavy whipping cream. And I'm going to place it into a stainless steel bowl with 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar and a teaspoon of vanilla extract. When you're making whipped cream, make sure that you have a nice clean stainless steel bowl and a nice flexible whisk, right? The tines of the whisk need to be flexible so that you can add air into this cream instead of just stir it. So I'm going to whip this until it forms stiff peaks. I just want to make sure that I don't over whip it because if I do that, I have a chance that I'm going to go more towards butter instead of whipped cream. So I'm going to keep on whisking this. Notice how I am actually lifting the bowl, which helps me to actually lift the cream while I'm whisking it. So it's allowing me to add more air instead of just stirring it, which would take much longer and I would not get the final result that I was looking for. You can see that I'm just about at the consistency I'm looking for, that when I lift the whisk, the cream does not fall off the edge of the tines. Okay, so I'm not going to use all of this for my recipe. Some of it I'm going to leave behind for ice cream or if somebody wants to add it to their coffee. So you can see that my pastry cream has really stiffened up, and what you need to do is you need to whisk it to help kind of loosen it. So I'm going to mix it up until it is a little bit more pliable. Okay. I also want to make sure that I am whisking out any of the lumps that have formed into this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add in about half of the whipped cream that I have made for this recipe. So I made a full cup of whipped cream. I'm going to use about half a cup of whipped cream for this recipe. If I add too much, what's going to happen is that when I place this custard in between my my puff pastry halves, it is actually going to seep out, and I want to avoid that. So if you notice that I am not really mixing this vigorously, I am folding it into the pastry cream. I'm turning it, lifting it, and folding it over just to make sure that I don't break any of the air out of the whipped cream that I have made. And it may take a little more time to do it this way, but my final result will be worth it. I'm going to take a pastry bag and I'm going to put my pastry cream into this pastry bag. I like to just rest it into a cup just so that it doesn't fall over. It's easier to fill for me this way. And I'm going to pour the pastry cream into this bag. Just be sure not to overfill this bag because it is much easier to handle when you have an appropriate amount in the bag. This recipe is plenty to fit into this pastry bag. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the tip, and then I'm going to pipe out pastry cream onto half of the pieces of cooked puff pastry that I have. Then I'm going to top them with the other half of the puff pastries, and then I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of powdered sugar on top with a fine mesh colander. These actually call for an excessive amount of powdered sugar on the top to add a little bit of sweetness and a little bit of color contrast when you plate them up. If you wanted to add an additional layer on top of these Napoleons, you could do that, but I do find that they're much harder to eat when in a triple layer or a double layer of cream than a single layer of cream. You can also make this into a cake by cooking the whole sheet that we rolled out instead of cutting it, but I like to serve individual portions of this dessert. I hope you like my recipe today. Let us know if you try it. And as always, please subscribe to our channel to see more videos from our home kitchen to yours.